The invitation came in the mail on a Tuesday. No return address, just my name written in red crayon on the front. Inside was a ticket for two to something called Giggles and Gasps Clown Spectacular at the old warehouse on Pine Street. My 7-year-old son, Danny, had been begging me to take him somewhere fun ever since his mom left us 3 months ago. The ticket said the show was free. Free entertainment sounded perfect for my tight budget. Danny jumped up and down when I showed him the colorful invitation. His smile was the first real one I'd seen since the divorce papers were signed. "Can we go, Dad?" "Please. I love clowns," he said, hugging my leg tight. I hadn't seen him this excited about anything in weeks. The show was scheduled for Saturday at 2 p.m. Saturday came faster than I expected. The warehouse sat at the end of a dead-end street surrounded by empty lots filled with weeds. Other families were walking toward the building, all carrying the same red crayon invitations. Kids were laughing and running ahead of their parents. The entrance was decorated with balloons and streamers. A sign hung crooked above the door that read, "Welcome to the greatest show you'll never forget." The paint looked fresh, but something about it seemed wrong. Like someone had tried too hard to make it look happy. Inside, the warehouse was bigger than it looked from outside. Rows of folding chairs faced a small stage made of wooden boards. Red and white striped curtains hung behind it. The ceiling was so high I couldn't see the top in the dim light. Danny and I found seats in the third row. He bounced in his chair, looking around at all the other kids. There were maybe 50 families there, all with children between 5 and 10 years old. Everyone seemed excited, but I noticed the parents looked tired, like they hadn't slept well in a while. The lights went out all at once. No warning, no dimming, just complete darkness. Danny grabbed my hand, then a single spotlight hit the stage and the curtains opened with a loud whoosh. 3 clowns walked out slowly. They wore traditional white face paint with red noses and colorful wigs. But something was off about their makeup. The smiles were painted too wide, stretching almost to their ears. Their eyes were completely black, like someone had colored them in with marker. "Hello, children," the middle clown called out in a voice that was too high and squeaky. "Are you ready for the most amazing show of your lives?" The kids cheered, but the sound seemed muffled, like the warehouse was swallowing their voices. The clowns started doing tricks, juggling balls that seemed to float in the air longer than they should, magic tricks where things disappeared and came back in impossible places. Danny laughed and clapped, completely caught up in the show. But I kept watching the clowns' faces. Their painted smiles never changed, but their real mouths underneath moved differently, like they were saying different words than what we were hearing. And their eyes followed individual kids in the audience, studying them. The first clown, who called himself Giggles, picked a little girl from the front row to help with a trick. She couldn't have been more than 6, with pigtails and a pink dress. She skipped up to the stage happily. "What's your name, sweetie?" Giggles asked, his painted smile stretching even wider. "Emma," she said into the microphone he held. "Emma, what a pretty name. Now, Emma, I want you to look into this magic mirror." He pulled out a small handheld mirror with an ornate silver frame. "Tell me what you see." Emma looked into the mirror and her face changed. Her smile disappeared and her eyes went wide. She stood perfectly still, staring into the glass. The audience waited, but she didn't say anything. "Emma," Giggles prompted, "what do you see?" "I see." Emma's voice was different now, flat and distant. "I see home. I see my room. I see me sleeping." She looked up at Giggles with those wide, empty eyes. "But I'm not there anymore, am I?" A few parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Giggles laughed his squeaky laugh and took the mirror away. What an imagination. Let's give Emma a big hand. Everyone clapped, but Emma just stood there staring out at nothing. She walked back to her seat like she was sleepwalking. Her parents looked worried, but before they could say anything, the second clown started a new trick. This one called himself Chuckles, and he was bigger than the others, with a red wig that looked like it was made of real hair. "Now I need a brave boy to help me," Chuckles announced. His voice was deeper than Giggles, almost like a growl. Danny's hand shot up before I could stop him. "Me! Pick me!" he shouted. "You there, young man? Come on up." Chuckles pointed right at Danny. My son jumped up and ran to the stage before I could grab him. "What's your name, son?" Chuckles asked, putting a huge white-gloved hand on Danny's shoulder. "Danny, I'm 7 years old." My boy was so excited he was practically vibrating. 7, a perfect age. Now, Danny, I'm going to show you something very special. Chuckles reached into his baggy polka dot pants and pulled out a small wooden box. This box contains the greatest treasure in the world, but you can only see it if you're very, very special. Danny nodded eagerly. Chuckles opened the box and held it so Danny could look inside. Just like with Emma, my son's face changed instantly. His excitement drained away, replaced by something I'd never seen before. Fear? No. It was deeper than that. Recognition. "What do you see, Danny?" Chuckles asked, his painted grin somehow looking hungry. "I see..." Danny's voice was small now, almost a whisper. "I see my dad, but he's old. Really old. And he's crying." He looked up at Chuckles with tears starting in his eyes. "Why is my dad crying?" "Because," Chuckles said, closing the box with a sharp snap, "he misses you." I stood up. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. "Danny, come back here. Now." But Danny didn't move. He stared at Chuckles like he was hypnotized. The clown's painted face turned toward me, and for just a second I swear I saw something else underneath the makeup. Something that wasn't human. "Sir, please sit down," Giggles called out. "The show isn't over yet." "Danny," I called louder. "Come here." Finally, my son blinked and looked at me. He walked back to his seat, but he moved differently now, like Emma had. Slow and careful, like he was afraid he might break something. The third clown hadn't done a trick yet. This one was the tallest, with a purple wig and a polka dot costume that was too big for his thin frame. He stepped forward and spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper, but somehow everyone in the warehouse could hear him clearly. "My name is Gasps," he said. "And now it's time for the finale." All 3 clowns stood in a line across the stage. They raised their arms at the same time, and the warehouse began to change. The walls stretched upward, getting taller and taller until they disappeared into darkness. The ceiling vanished completely. The other families didn't seem to notice. They kept watching the stage like nothing was happening. But I could see everything changing around us. Our chairs were no longer on solid ground. We were sitting on a platform that floated in empty space. "Look around you, children," Gasps whispered. "This is where you really are." Some of the kids turned their heads, and when they did, they screamed. Not the fun, excited screams from earlier. These were screams of pure terror, because they could see what I was seeing. We weren't in a warehouse anymore. We were in some kind of void, a place between places. Stars that weren't really stars floated around us, pulsing with sick light. In the distance, I could see other platforms with other families, all watching their own clown shows. "Dad," Danny whispered, grabbing my arm. "I don't want to be here anymore." "We're leaving," I said, standing up and pulling him with me. "Right now." But when I tried to walk toward the exit, there was no exit. Just empty space and the floating platform we were trapped on. Other parents were starting to notice now, standing up and looking around in confusion. "Please remain seated," Giggles said, his voice no longer squeaky but deep and echoing. "The show is just beginning." The clowns began to change. Their colorful costumes started to fade, turning gray and then black. Their white face paint cracked and peeled away, showing something underneath that made my stomach turn. They weren't wearing makeup at all. Their real faces were white as bone, with holes where their eyes should be, and mouths full of teeth that were too sharp and too many. "You brought your children to us," Chuckles said, his voice now a rumbling growl. "You saw our invitation and you came willingly. That makes them ours." "No," I said, pushing Danny behind me. "We're leaving." "Where will you go?" Gasps asked, spreading his arms wide to show the endless darkness around us. "This is your home now. This is where all the children come to play." I looked around desperately. Some of the other parents were crying. Their kids sat motionless in their chairs, staring at nothing with empty eyes. But not all of them. A few children were still aware, still scared, still human. "The ones who can still see," Giggles explained, noticing where I was looking. "They're special. They'll make the best playmates." Danny squeezed my hand. "Dad, what are they talking about?" I didn't answer. I was thinking fast, trying to figure out how to get us out of this nightmare. The invitations had brought us here, but they were just paper. The real trap was something else. Then I remembered what Emma had said when she looked in the mirror. She saw herself sleeping at home, and Danny had seen me as an old man crying because he missed him. They weren't showing the kids magic tricks. They were showing them the truth. "You're not really clowns," I said, stepping forward. "You're something else. Something that feeds on children's fear and wonder." All three creatures turned to look at me, their bone-white faces stretched into grins that were nothing like the painted smiles they'd worn before. "Very good," Gasps whispered. "But knowing won't save you." "Maybe not," I said, "but it might save them." I turned to face the other families. "Listen to me. This isn't real. Your kids are still at home, still safe. They're dreaming, and so are you. These things are trying to make you forget that." Some of the parents looked at me like I was crazy, but others started to nod, understanding flickering in their eyes. The children who were still aware began to stand up, reaching for their parents. "Lies!" Giggles shrieked, his voice now like nails on a chalkboard. "You're here. You're ours. You can never leave." But doubt was spreading through the crowd. As more people realized something was wrong, the floating platform began to shake. The fake warehouse around us flickered like a broken TV screen. "Dad," Danny said, tugging on my shirt. "I remember now. We were at home watching TV. I fell asleep on the couch. This is just a bad dream." "That's right," I said, hugging him tight. "It's just a dream, and dreams end when you wake up." The three creatures let out a horrible wailing sound. They rushed toward us, their faces twisting into something even more terrible. But as they got closer, they began to fade. The platform dissolved under our feet. I felt like I was falling, but it wasn't scary. It was like sinking into a warm bed. The darkness around us turned gray, then lighter, until I opened my eyes. I was on my couch at home with Danny sleeping next to me. The TV was still on, showing some late-night comedy show. The clock on the wall said 3:17 a.m., Danny stirred and opened his eyes. "Dad, I had the weirdest dream." "Me too, buddy," I said, turning off the TV. "Let's get you to bed." I carried him to his room and tucked him in. He was asleep again before I turned off the light. I stood in his doorway for a long time, just watching him breathe. Safe. Real. Home. The next morning, I almost convinced myself it had all been just a strange dream. Danny didn't remember much about it, just that there had been clowns and they weren't very nice. We had breakfast and I got him ready for school like any other day. But when I went to get the mail, there was something that made my blood freeze. Another red crayon envelope with my name on it. Inside was a new invitation. This one for a puppet show at the old theater downtown. I tore it up and threw it away, but 3 hours later, there was another one. This time it was for a magic show at the community center. I threw that one away too. They kept coming. Every few hours, a new invitation would appear in my mailbox, or slipped under my door, or sitting on my car windshield. Puppet shows, magic acts, storytelling hours, all at different places around town, all written in that same red crayon handwriting. I started collecting them instead of throwing them away. By the end of the week, I had 17 invitations, all for children's entertainment, all promising fun and wonder and memories that would last forever. Danny started having nightmares. He'd wake up crying, saying the clowns were calling his name. He described places that sounded exactly like the void we'd been trapped in, with floating platforms and families watching shows that never ended. "They want me to come back, Dad," he said one night after a particularly bad dream. "They say I'm special. They say I belong with them." I held him until he fell back asleep, but I stayed awake all night. When morning came, I found 5 new invitations under our front door. These were different from the others. Instead of being addressed to me, they had Danny's name written in that childish red crayon. That's when I knew we were in real trouble. Whatever those things were, they hadn't given up. They wanted Danny specifically, and they were getting bolder about it. I called in sick to work and spent the day researching everything I could find about the places mentioned in the invitations. The old warehouse on Pine Street had been empty for 3 years. The theater downtown had been closed since 1987. The community center had burned down in 1995. None of the places existed anymore, but somehow these creatures were still using them as bait, still luring families into their trap. How many other people had gotten invitations? How many children had been taken? I tried to find news stories about missing kids or families, but there was nothing. If people were disappearing, it wasn't making the news. Maybe because they weren't really disappearing. Maybe they were just somewhere else. Somewhere between sleeping and waking, trapped in an endless show. Danny's nightmares got worse. He started talking in his sleep, carrying on conversations with people who weren't there. Sometimes I'd hear him giggling at jokes I couldn't hear, or clapping for performances I couldn't see. "Danny," I'd whisper, shaking him gently. "Wake up. You're dreaming." But he'd look at me with those empty eyes, the same look he'd had on the floating platform. "I'm not dreaming, Dad. I'm watching the show. It's really funny. You should come see." During the day, he seemed normal. He'd eat breakfast, play with his toys, watch cartoons. But every night, the dreams would take him back to that place. And every morning, there would be more invitations. The creatures were patient. They didn't try to grab Danny all at once. Instead, they were slowly pulling him in, making the dream world seem more real and more appealing than our everyday life. He started talking about his friends at the show, describing other children who played games and watched performances all day long. They don't have to go to school, he told me one morning over cereal. They don't have homework or chores. They just get to have fun all the time. That doesn't sound real, Danny, I said. Everyone has to go to school. Everyone has responsibilities. Not there, he said with a dreamy smile. There, you can just be a kid forever. I realized then what the creatures were really offering. Not just entertainment, but escape. A place where children never had to grow up, never had to face the hard parts of life. For a kid whose parents had just gotten divorced, whose world had been turned upside down, it probably sounded perfect. But I knew the truth. Those children weren't playing games and having fun. They were trapped, their minds slowly drained away until they became empty shells. The creatures fed on their innocence, their joy, their very humanity. I had to find a way to stop them before they took my son completely. That night, I stayed awake and watched Danny sleep. Around midnight, he started talking again, but this time I listened carefully to his side of the conversation. Yes, I want to come back, he mumbled. The show was fun. Giggles says he has new tricks to show me. He paused, listening to something I couldn't hear. My dad. He won't let me go. He says it's dangerous. But it's not dangerous, is it? It's just fun. Another pause. You'll help me. You'll make sure I can come to all the shows? Forever and ever? That's when I knew I had to act. They weren't just visiting Danny in his dreams anymore. They were making him a promise, offering him a deal. And 7-year-olds don't understand the kind of deals that creatures like that make. I shook Danny awake. His eyes opened, but they weren't his eyes. They were black, just like the clown's had been. Dad, he said, but his voice sounded wrong. Too high, too cheerful. Why did you wake me up? I was having such a good dream. Danny, listen to me very carefully, I said, gripping his shoulders. Those clowns, those creatures, they're not your friends. They want to hurt you. No, they don't, he said, smiling that painted clown smile. They just want to play. They said if I come back, I'll never have to be sad again. I'll never have to miss Mom or worry about anything. But you won't be you anymore, I said desperately. You'll be like those other kids we saw, empty and lost. Is that what you want? For just a moment, the black faded from his eyes, and I saw my real son looking back at me. Scared, confused, but still human. Dad, he whispered. I can hear them. Even when I'm awake, I can hear them calling my name. They say they're coming for me soon. They say next time, you won't be able to stop them. I pulled him into my arms and held him tight. I won't let them take you. I promise. But even as I said it, I could hear something in the distance. Faint music, like a carnival tune played on a broken music box. It was coming from outside, getting closer. I went to the window and looked out. The street was empty, but I could see lights moving in the darkness. Red and white striped lights, swirling and dancing like they were alive. The music got louder, and I could make out other sounds underneath it. Children laughing, parents clapping, the squeak of balloon animals being twisted into shape. They're here, Danny said from behind me. His voice was excited again, all trace of fear gone. The show is starting. I spun around. Danny was standing by his bedroom door, no longer in his pajamas. Instead, he wore a small clown costume, complete with white face paint and a red nose. He looked exactly like a miniature version of the creatures from the warehouse. Come on, Dad, he said, his painted smile stretching impossibly wide. Don't you want to see the greatest show on Earth? This wasn't my son anymore. Not really. The creatures had taken him while I was looking out the window, replaced him with their own twisted version. But somewhere inside that painted face, the real Danny was still trapped. "I know you're in there," I said, stepping toward him. "Fight them, Danny. Remember who you are." The fake Danny tilted his head, the painted smile never wavering. "I don't know what you mean, Dad. I'm Danny, your son, the son who wants to go to the show." "No," I said firmly. "My son hates clowns. He only got excited about the show because he was lonely and sad. But you're not offering him comfort. You're offering him oblivion." The creature wearing Danny's face let out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Fine. You want to see your real son? Here he is." The white paint began to crack and peel away. Underneath was Danny's face, but his eyes were hollow and his skin was gray. He looked like he'd been sick for months, wasted away to almost nothing. "Help me, Dad," the real Danny whispered through cracked lips. "They won't let me wake up. They won't let me come home." The fake cheerfulness dropped away completely. This was what the creatures really did to the children they took. They drained them slowly, feeding off their life force until nothing was left but an empty shell. "Let him go," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "He's just a little boy. He doesn't deserve this." "Deserve?" The creature's voice was now a chorus of all three clowns speaking at once. "Children don't deserve anything. They're just food, sweet, innocent food that keeps us alive." "But you need them to come willingly," I said, remembering something from the warehouse. "That's why you use invitations. That's why you put on shows. You can't just take them. They have to choose." The creature's painted smile faltered for just a second. "Yes, the fear tastes better when it's mixed with betrayal, when they realize the fun they thought they wanted is actually their doom." "Then I have a deal for you," I said. "Take me instead." Danny's hollow eyes widened. "Dad, no." "I'll come willingly," I continued. "I'll be your star performer, your main attraction. But you have to let Danny go. You have to let all the children go." The creatures considered this. I could feel them thinking, weighing the value of one adult against dozens of children. Adults had more life experience, more complex fears. But children were easier to catch, easier to keep. "One adult," the creature said slowly, "in exchange for all the children we've collected? That hardly seems fair." "How about this?" I said. "If you can scare me, really terrify me, then you can keep everyone. But if I'm not afraid, if I can watch your show without giving you the fear you need, then everyone goes free." It was a huge gamble, but I'd noticed something in the warehouse. The creatures fed on fear and wonder, but they also seemed to need it. When some of the families had stopped being afraid, when they'd realized it was just a dream, the whole illusion had started to fall apart. "Interesting," the creature mused. "And if we accept this challenge, you'll come with us now? No more fighting, no more resistance?" "I'll come with you now," I agreed. The creature wearing Danny's face grinned with sharp teeth. "Then we accept." The world around us dissolved. My son's bedroom faded away, replaced by the familiar darkness of the void. But this time, there was only one platform and only one chair. For me. The three clowns stood on their stage, looking exactly as they had in the warehouse. Giggles, chuckles, and gasps, ready to put on their show. Around the edges of the platform, I could see other chairs in the darkness, all filled with children. Some I recognized from the warehouse, Others were new faces, kids who had been collected over the years. Danny sat in the front row, still wearing his clown makeup but looking more like himself. He was scared, but he was alert. Human. The other children looked the same way. Frightened, but aware. My challenge had given them hope. "Ladies and gentlemen," Giggles announced in his squeaky voice, "tonight we have a very special show. A father who thinks he's brave enough to face his deepest fears." "Let's see how long he lasts," Chuckles added with his growling laugh. The show began. But this wasn't like the simple magic tricks they'd performed for the children. This was something much worse. The clowns showed me visions of every terrible thing that had ever happened to me, every mistake I'd ever made, every person I'd ever hurt. They showed me my divorce, played back every fight with my ex-wife in perfect detail. They showed me all the times I'd failed as a father, all the moments when I'd been too tired or too stressed to give Danny the attention he needed. They showed me a future where I grew old alone, where Danny grew up hating me for not being there when he needed me most. It was horrible, but it wasn't scary. It was just sad. And sadness, I realized, wasn't what these creatures ate. They needed terror, panic, the kind of fear that made people lose control of themselves. "Is that all you've got?" I asked when the first wave of visions ended. The clowns looked confused. Giggles stepped forward, his painted face twisted with frustration. "You should be screaming by now. You should be begging us to stop." "Why?" I said. "Because you showed me some bad memories? Everyone has those. Everyone makes mistakes. That doesn't make me a monster, and it doesn't make you scary." The creatures tried again. This time they showed me Danny dying in 100 different ways. Car accidents, diseases, drowning, falling. They showed me my own death, slow and painful and alone. They showed me the end of the world, the heat death of the universe, the meaninglessness of existence. But none of it touched me. Because I understood something now that I hadn't before. These creatures could only show me things I was already afraid of. And I'd spent so many sleepless nights since the divorce, worrying about every possible disaster that I'd already faced all these fears in my own mind. Seeing them played out by supernatural clowns wasn't any worse than the anxiety attacks I'd had at 3 a.m., lying in bed and imagining all the ways I could fail my son. "You're trying too hard," I told them. "Real fear isn't about seeing scary things. It's about losing control. It's about not knowing what's going to happen next. But you've already shown me your whole playbook. Now I know exactly what you are and how you work. Where's the mystery? Where's the terror?" The clowns began to panic. Their painted faces cracked and their costumes started to fade. Around the platform, the children in their chairs began to sit up straighter, hope flickering in their eyes. "You can't do this," gasps whispered. "We are fear incarnate. We are the darkness that lives in every heart." "No," I said, standing up from my chair. "You're parasites. You're the thing that makes people afraid to take their kids to real shows, real places where families can have fun together. You're the reason parents second-guess every invitation, every opportunity for joy." I walked toward the stage. The clowns backed away from me, their bone-white faces showing real terror for the first time. "But here's the thing about parasites," I continued. "They die when they can't feed. And I'm not afraid of you. I'm angry at you for trying to take my son. And anger isn't food for creatures like you." The stage began to crumble. The void around us filled with light, not the sick, pulsing light of false stars, but warm sunlight streaming through windows. The warehouse dissolved completely, replaced by my living room. We were back home, all of us. The children who had been trapped were suddenly sitting on my couch, my floor, looking around in amazement. Their parents appeared too, blinking in confusion, but alive and aware. The three clowns were there as well, but they were shrinking. Without fear to feed on, they were becoming smaller and smaller, their painted faces fading until they looked like nothing more dangerous than broken dolls. "This isn't possible," Giggles squeaked, his voice now tiny and weak. "Children always fear. Parents always worry. There's always food for us." "Maybe," I said, kneeling down to look at the three small, pathetic creatures. "But not here. Not anymore. You picked the wrong family this time." Danny ran to me, his clown makeup gone, looking like my real son again. "Dad, you did it. You saved everyone." I hugged him tight, feeling his solid, warm, completely human body against mine. "We saved everyone, buddy. We saved each other." The other families were reuniting, crying and laughing and holding each other. Parents were calling their children's names. Kids were running to their moms and dads. It was chaos, but it was good chaos. It was life. As for the three creatures, they continued to shrink until they were no bigger than insects. Then they simply faded away. Without fear to sustain them, they had nothing left to exist on. But I kept the memory of them, and I kept all the invitations, locked in a box in my closet, because I knew that somewhere out there, other creatures like them were still hunting, still sending out their red crayon letters, still promising fun and wonder to families who didn't know any better. The weeks that followed were different. Danny slept peacefully through the night. No more nightmares about clowns calling his name. No more conversations with invisible friends during his sleep. He was fully present during the day, laughing at cartoons and asking me to help with his homework. But I noticed changes in both of us. Danny had become more cautious about new experiences, more likely to ask questions before agreeing to try something. He'd developed an instinct for sensing when something felt wrong, even if he couldn't explain why. "Dad," he said one day, while we were walking through the mall, "that man over there keeps staring at kids. That's weird, right?" I looked where he was pointing and saw a thin man in a suit watching children play in the indoor playground. There was something off about the way he stood, the way his eyes tracked their movements. Mall security was already walking toward him. "Good catch, buddy," I said. "Always trust your feelings about people." We started a new tradition after that. Every weekend, we'd go to real shows, real circuses with real clowns who made balloon animals and told silly jokes, real magic shows where the only trick was making people smile, real puppet shows where the only strings attached were the ones you could see. We'd always talk about the shows afterward, making sure Danny understood the difference between harmless fun and something that felt wrong. I taught him to trust his instincts, to speak up if something or someone made him uncomfortable. "The real world has plenty of wonderful things in it," I told him. "You don't need to go looking for magic in dark places." But the creature's influence hadn't completely disappeared from our lives. Other families who had been at that warehouse show started reaching out to me. They'd found my number somehow, calling to share similar stories of invitations that kept coming, children who talked about clown friends in their dreams. I started a support group. We met every Tuesday night at the community center, a dozen parents who had all faced the same nightmare. We shared our experiences and learned to recognize the warning signs. Most importantly, we helped each other stay strong when the invitations started appearing again. Because they did keep coming, not just for our families, but for new ones. The creatures I'd defeated weren't the only ones of their kind. There were others out there, other predators who fed on children's innocence and wonder. We developed a system, When someone in our group received a suspicious invitation, they'd bring it to the meeting. We'd research the location, check the history, and warn other parents in the area. We saved dozens of families from falling into the same trap we had. Danny helped more than I expected. His experience had given him an ability to spot the fake invitations immediately. He could tell just by looking at one whether it came from something dangerous or just a poorly designed flyer for a legitimate show. "This one's bad," he said one evening, looking at an invitation Mrs. Peterson had brought to our group. It was for a midnight magic spectacular at an abandoned school. "See how the letters look happy, but they're not really happy? And it smells wrong." He was right. The invitation had a strange smell, like old flowers mixed with something sour. When we investigated, we found out the school had been closed after several children had gone missing during a Halloween party there 20 years ago. We warned everyone we could, posted about it online, even called the police. The show was supposed to happen that Saturday, but no families showed up. Whatever creatures had been planning to use that location gave up and moved on. Our group grew larger as word spread. Parents from 3 different cities joined us, all with stories of narrow escapes from supernatural predators who used children's entertainment as bait. We created a newsletter, started a website, even got interviewed by a local news station. The reporter was skeptical at first. "You're saying there are actual monsters out there disguised as clowns and magicians?" "Not disguised," I corrected her. "They take whatever form will attract children. Clowns, puppeteers, storytellers. They study what kids in each area like and become that thing." "And you believe this because I've seen them," I said simply. "Because they tried to take my son. And they're still out there trying to take other people's children." The story aired on Halloween night. We got hundreds of calls afterward, mostly from parents who had received strange invitations or whose kids had been having nightmares about shows that never seemed to end. But we also got calls from people who thought we were crazy, who accused us of trying to ruin innocent entertainment for children. Some local businesses that put on legitimate shows complained that we were hurting their reputation. I understood their frustration, but I also knew what I'd experienced. The difference between a real clown and one of those creatures wasn't something you could explain easily. You had to see it for yourself. Feel the wrongness that surrounded them like a cold fog. Danny was in 4th grade now, 2 years older, and much wiser than most kids his age. He'd started talking about wanting to help other children avoid what had happened to him. He drew pictures of the creatures we'd faced, not because he was traumatized, but because he wanted other kids to know what to look for. "They're not scary when you know what they really are," he told me one day while coloring in one of his drawings. "They're just hungry and mean, like bullies, but worse." His teacher had initially been concerned about the violent content of his artwork. But after I explained our situation and showed her some of the evidence we'd collected, she became one of our strongest supporters. She started teaching her students about trusting their instincts and recognizing when adults were trying to manipulate them. The creatures adapted, of course. They learned to be more subtle, more careful about how they approached families. The invitations became more sophisticated, often including fake endorsements from schools or community organizations. They started using social media, creating fake events that looked completely legitimate. But our group adapted too. We developed better ways to verify whether an event was real, created a database of suspicious locations, and established contacts with law enforcement agencies who were willing to take our concerns seriously. Detective Maria Santos became our main ally on the police force. She'd initially been assigned to investigate our cult activity, after several complaints from concerned citizens. But after hearing our stories and seeing the evidence we'd collected, she became convinced that something genuinely dangerous was happening. "I've been a cop for 15 years, she told our group during one of our meetings. "I've seen a lot of weird stuff, but nothing like this. The pattern is too consistent to ignore. Too many families with the same story." She helped us set up a hotline for reporting suspicious invitations. Her department started investigating locations mentioned in the fake invitations, often finding evidence of previous disappearances or unexplained incidents. The abandoned warehouse where our ordeal had begun was torn down 6 months after our encounter. The city claimed it was a safety hazard, but Detective Santos told me privately that they'd found things inside that couldn't be explained. Rooms that were bigger than the building should have allowed. Stages that had been built with no way to access them. Children's belongings that dated back decades. "Whatever was using that place," she said, "it had been operating for a long time." That's when I realized the true scope of what we were dealing with. These creatures weren't just random monsters. They were part of something larger, an organized network that had been feeding on children for generations. The support group evolved into something more like a research organization. We started tracking patterns, mapping locations, trying to understand how the creatures chose their targets and hunting grounds. What we discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. They seemed to be drawn to areas where children were already vulnerable. Neighborhoods going through economic hardship, communities dealing with high divorce rates, schools where kids were struggling academically or socially. They fed not just on fear and wonder, but on loneliness and desperation. "They're like emotional vampires," Dr. Sarah Chen, a child psychologist who had joined our group, explained. "They target children who are most likely to be drawn to the idea of escape, of finding a place where their problems don't exist." Danny, now 10 years old, had become our unofficial expert on recognizing the creature's influence. He could spot a fake invitation from across the room, and he'd developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when other children were being targeted. "There's a new kid in my class," he told me one evening, Tommy Miller. "He keeps talking about this cool magic show he's going to see this weekend, but something about it sounds wrong." I trusted Danny's instincts completely by now. We contacted Tommy's parents and discovered they'd received an invitation to a young magician's workshop at a location that didn't exist. The invitation promised to teach children real magic and encourage them to come alone so they could surprise their families with their new skills. We managed to convince Tommy's parents not to let him go, but it was a close call. The boy had been so excited about learning magic that he'd almost snuck out to attend the show by himself. Cases like Tommy's were becoming more common. The creatures were getting bolder, targeting individual children instead of whole families. This made them harder to detect, but also more dangerous. A child who disappeared while supposedly attending a magic workshop might not be missed for hours, giving the creatures plenty of time to complete their feeding. Our organization, which we'd named the Children's Safety Alliance, started working with schools to educate kids about these dangers. We developed age-appropriate presentations that taught children to be wary of entertainment invitations that came through the mail, especially if they promised exclusive or secretive experiences. "Real shows want parents to know about them," Danny would tell younger kids during our school visits. "Bad shows want you to keep secrets." The presentations were effective, but they also drew attention from the creatures themselves. We started receiving threatening messages, not through the mail, but in ways that were clearly supernatural. Words would appear on our bathroom mirrors, written in what looked like red crayon. Voices would whisper threats through our radios when we turned them on. "You're interfering with the natural order," one message had said. "Children need to dream. Children need to escape. You're taking that away from them." But we weren't taking anything away. We were giving children the tools to tell the difference between healthy imagination and dangerous delusion. We were teaching them that the real world, with all its problems and challenges, was still better than being trapped in a fake paradise. The most disturbing development came when we realized the creatures were starting to infiltrate legitimate entertainment. Real circuses would suddenly have new performers who made the other artists uncomfortable. Magic shows would add special guests who seemed to appear out of nowhere and disappeared just as mysteriously. They're embedding themselves in normal activities, Detective Santos warned us during a meeting, making it harder to tell what's safe and what isn't. This forced us to develop even more sophisticated detection methods. We created a checklist for parents to use when evaluating any entertainment opportunity for their children. We established relationships with legitimate performers who could help us identify when something was off about a show or event. The checklist became popular beyond our organization. Parenting websites started sharing it, schools included it in their safety materials, and other communities began forming their own versions of our support group. But success brought new challenges. The creatures began adapting faster than we could keep up with. They started using technology more effectively, creating convincing fake websites and social media profiles. They learned to mimic the communication styles of legitimate organizations perfectly. One particularly clever trap involved a fake summer camp that promised to teach children life skills through play. The website looked completely professional, with testimonials from satisfied parents and photos of happy campers. But every photo showed children with slightly empty expressions, and the testimonials all used similar language patterns. Danny spotted the deception immediately. "Look at their eyes, Dad," he said, pointing at the screen. "They're not really looking at anything. And see how all the parents talk the same way in these reviews." We exposed the fake camp before any children were enrolled, but it was a close call. The sophistication of the deception showed that the creatures were learning from our efforts to stop them, evolving their tactics to stay ahead of our defenses. The most frightening revelation came when we discovered that some of the creatures had begun targeting adults as well. Parents who had been particularly effective at protecting their children started experiencing nightmares similar to what the kids had gone through. They'd dream of shows where they were the performers, trapped on stage while audiences of their own fears watched and laughed. I experienced this myself one night, 3 years after our original encounter. I found myself standing in a spotlight wearing a ridiculous costume while voices from the darkness demanded that I entertain them. The audience was made up of every mistake I'd ever made, every moment of self-doubt and inadequacy given form and substance. But unlike the children's dreams, this one felt different. Less real, more obviously artificial. The creature's power over adults was weaker because our minds were more complex, our fears more nuanced. We could recognize the manipulation more easily. Still, the psychological toll was significant. Several members of our support group needed therapy to deal with the recurring nightmares. 2 families moved to different states, hoping distance would break the creature's hold on them. But most of us stayed and continued fighting, because we knew that for every family we saved, there were others we couldn't reach in time. The creatures were patient and persistent, and they had all the time in the world to perfect their methods. Danny, now in middle school, had grown into a remarkably resilient and insightful young man. The experience that could have traumatized him for life had instead given him a sense of purpose and a deep empathy for other children facing difficult situations. "I want to study psychology when I grow up," he told me one day. "I want to help kids who've been through what we went through. And I want to find better ways to stop these things." His determination filled me with pride and hope. Maybe the next generation would be better equipped to deal with these supernatural predators. Maybe Danny and kids like him would find solutions that our generation couldn't imagine. But until then, we kept working. Every Tuesday night, our support group met to share information and plan our next moves. Every week brought new reports of suspicious invitations, fake events, and children who had narrow escapes from creatures that fed on innocence and wonder. "The real world has plenty of wonderful things in it," I still told Danny, and now I told other children as well. "You don't need to go looking for magic in dark places." And slowly, one family at a time, we were making a difference, teaching children to trust their instincts, helping parents recognize the warning signs, building a network of protectors who refuse to let these creatures operate in the shadows. Because sometimes the greatest show isn't a spectacular performance on a distant stage. Sometimes it's just a father and son sitting together in their own living room, safe in the knowledge that they've helped make the world a little bit safer for other families. That's the kind of magic worth believing in. That's the kind of show that really does last forever.